That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, my dudes, we have had a ton of injuries over the past week. Now, we really haven't had the chance until now to dive in depth in exactly what this means for the entire fantasy football landscape, because we know that when you have a top tier player go down, not only is it going to impact their fantasy football value, but it's going to impact pretty much everything that you are seeing across drafts. So what I want to do in this video is I want to specify what the impacts are from the Michael Thomas injury, from the Cam Akers injury, and talk about what we are doing in adjusting every player in their respective offenses and where you should be drafting them in fantasy drafts. Now, before we get into that, please guys go down there, drop a like on this video. If we can get this video over 1,000 likes, that would be ridiculous. I mean, even if you're not going to do it for me, at least do it for the new studio. And also, of course, if you want our fantasy football draft guide, that is currently available over there on Patreon, as well as all of our updated rankings and tiers for both fantasy football in 2020, as well as dynasty fantasy football, because y'all know I love me some dynasty, but we're not going to make this a dynasty video. We're going to be focusing in on 2021 fantasy leagues. And the first thing that I want to look at is the Michael Thomas injury, because, I mean, there's a lot less uncertainty here than what we have with Darrell Henderson. And we've already made a video diving into the Darrell Henderson impact, but let's dive into Michael Thomas in depth right now. Okay, so now everybody knows by now that Michael Thomas had surgery on that ankle in June. And yes, we don't have an official timetable. And honestly, that is scary. I mean, you have heard so many people talk about the fact that with Michael Thomas, you don't necessarily know when you are getting him back. And that's going to cloud where he is supposed to be going in fantasy drafts. Because if we were told, hey, you are going to draft Michael Thomas, he's going to be out for the first 4 weeks. And then after that, you're going to be 100% good with Michael Thomas and you can play him at full strength, then we would have a really good idea of where you should be drafting Michael Thomas. I'd be telling you target him in the early 5th round. But when all we know is the typical timetable of the surgery and we have a vague understanding of it was done in June, I mean, there is so much uncertainty around this situation. And there are two things that I really want to hammer in on that I don't think that many people have talked about in the case of the Michael Thomas injury. The first thing is if he lands on the PUP list. If he lands on the PUP list where we know that the Saints are saying he's not playing for the first 6 weeks, now that is concerning, because if he avoids that list, what that tells us is not only that he has a chance to actually play within the first 6 weeks, but it tells us exactly what the New Orleans Saints are thinking about the severity of the injury. Because if they're willing to put him on that list before the season even starts, that doesn't just mean that he's going to be missing the first 6 weeks. That's a minimum. I think if that were to happen, based on all indications, you would probably be expecting Michael Thomas to possibly miss anywhere from 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks of fantasy football. And that leads me directly into the next thing that we need to discuss. And that is the cost of drafting Michael Thomas in fantasy leagues. Now with Michael Thomas, I understand this is a player that when he gets back to your starting lineup, he is going to be giving you a significant edge over your competition. Now, we don't exactly know what kind of edge that is going to be, given the fact that we don't know if he's going to be able to come back at 100% strength. I know a lot of people that specialize in these type of surgeries are saying it's impossible, but I want to give a quick warning to everybody playing fantasy football. I mean, we hear that stuff from doctors all the time, and then all of a sudden that player comes back and they are at 100% strength, because usually the doctors for this team, the doctors for really anybody operating on an NFL player, they are literally the top tier that you can find. I mean, try to find a better surgeon than whoever operated on Michael Thomas's ankle. I bet you can't find one in the entire United States. Now, with that being said, with Michael Thomas, I mean, if he does miss, just call it 6 weeks this upcoming season. That is 6 weeks that not only do you not get to start your 4th round, 5th, 6th round pick, but more importantly, that's 6 weeks where you have a dead roster spot on your team. You're going to be kind of just playing with one hand tied behind your back, and that you are going to be so limited on the waiver wire that I bet you any team that drafts Michael Thomas, they're not going to be the team that finds the next James Robinson. They're not going to be the team that finds the next Myles Gaskin. They're going to just have one less bench spot. And I know, based on how I make podcasts for everybody over there on Patreon, a lot of people that listen to this channel, you play in leagues where, I mean, you have just say a 5-6 man bench. And in a format like that, I mean, Michael Thomas is horrendous just to go through and limit your team and how you can churn your roster. So I really want to focus in on the cost of just actually rostering an injured player, not even the fact that you're not getting his production right away, but it also hurts you from a waiver wire standpoint. And now if we pull up where Michael Thomas has been going in high stakes redraft leagues since this injury, Michael Thomas has actually been drafted as the wide receiver 22. Now, I know that's a significant fall from where he once was. I know that we were screaming that Michael Thomas was a wide receiver 1 in fantasy, and we loved drafting Michael Thomas at the beginning of the 3rd round. We actually previously had him ranked as our wide receiver 9 over there on Patreon. But in my opinion, the fall from wide receiver 9 to wide receiver 22, it's not far enough. I think that you actually have to lower Michael Thomas down even further. I personally think that we are going to be lowering him down to the wide receiver 30. So if your league is drafting, just say Michael Thomas in the same exact range of an Adam Thielen, a Tyler Lockett, a Jamar Chase, a Brandon Ayuk, those players are currently going behind Michael Thomas in high stakes redraft leagues. I think that you actually look to fade him. Currently, I have him ranked directly behind Kenny Golladay, Robbie Anderson, who are my wide receiver 28 and 29. I have him ranked directly ahead of Odell Beckham Jr., Juju Smith-Schuster, Chase Claypool, and Courtland Sutton. So please be wary of where you are drafting Michael Thomas. I mean, I personally wouldn't even touch him until we get to the 7th round of fantasy drafts. I mean, if you pull up my rankings, I have him behind running backs like Mike Davis, Chase Edmonds. I have him behind tight ends like Kyle Pitts, TJ Hawkinson. I have him behind all those wide receivers that we have just talked about. So please be wary of drafting Michael Thomas because there is so much cost that goes into it. And trust me, I understand that this is a player that has a ton of upside. I mean, you go back to 2019, he averages over 100 receiving yards a game. He has almost 12 targets a game, 23 points per game, and he was by far and away the wide receiver 1 in fantasy. He almost averages 20 fantasy points a game in 2018 as well. But here with Thomas, I mean, he's not that same player. We don't even know if he's ever going to get back to that level. So if you're going to be missing an undisclosed amount of time, I am just trying to fade Michael Thomas in fantasy. Okay, so now our next player that I'm honestly going to be fading from this offense as well. Now, we were higher compared to consensus on him before this injury, but I think the overcorrection is going to be way too high. It's going to be Trautman Smith. Okay, so Trautman Smith, of course, he has to slightly move up our rankings. We move him up to 128 overall, so a 13th round selection. We have him directly behind Henry Ruggs, Trevor Lawrence, Devontae Parker, some tight ends in Irv Smith Jr. and Evan Ingram. We have Trautman Smith directly ahead of Gabriel Davis, Robert Tonyan, Darnell Mooney, Rondell Moore, Paris Campbell. And if you look at him with our wide receiver rankings, we actually currently have him ranked as a wide receiver 5 in fantasy. And now with Trautman Smith, I understand that he is the wide receiver 1 on this team. I mean, you lose Emmanuel Sanders, you lose Michael Thomas for the foreseeable future, and at the same time, Jared Cook is going to LA. So this offense literally has no weapons whatsoever. I mean, Emmanuel Sanders is leaving 82 targets behind. Jared Cook's leaving 60 targets behind. But we have already seen Trautman Smith without Michael Thomas. And to be completely honest, it's not that much better than when Michael Thomas is actually playing. And we've talked about this before, and that Trautman Smith and Michael Thomas, they operate on 2 completely different areas of the football field. It's kind of hard to call both of these players wide receivers, to be honest. I am on record saying that I think the injury to Michael Thomas actually helps Adam Trautman a lot more than it helps Trautman Smith, because the bet with Trautman Smith is more so a bet on efficiency and not a bet on volume. I think you're going to see something very similar to how Hollywood Brown was miscast as a wide receiver 1 last year in Baltimore. And we actually have concrete numbers here with Trautman Smith. So you look at 2020, he was the wide receiver 88 in points per game. Now, yes, Michael Thomas played a decent amount of games in 2020, but if you go through and you filter out the games that Michael Thomas did play, instead, you were just looking at the games where Trautman Smith played with Michael Thomas, either leaving early or not at all. And in those games, you actually had Trautman Smith as the wide receiver 74. So this is just a horrendous mark for Trautman Smith. And I think that anybody who's trying to claim that all of a sudden he's a top 36 wide receiver in fantasy, I mean, that is bogus. You should never be thinking about drafting a Trautman Smith in that range. Yes, if you can get him once you get to the 12th, 13th round, I definitely like that, especially in best ball. I mean, in best ball, that's the format that you want Traquan Smith with the amount of snaps that he's going to be playing. But I really want to be fading him elsewhere. So now our next player is someone we already mentioned, Adam Trautman. So Adam Trautman, someone that I had to come out and recognize right away as a massive winner for this Michael Thomas injury. But I think the price has honestly corrected too much. I think that he is currently going too high in fantasy drafts, where if you pull up his ADP right now, he is currently the tight end 14 in high stakes leagues since the Michael Thomas injury. And if you pull up our Patreon rankings, we actually have him as the tight end 17. Now, the difference between ADP and our rankings is, according to ADP, this is a tight end that should be going ahead of Evan Ingram, Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry. And I don't agree with that. I mean, I have both Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry ranked ahead of Adam Trautman based on the fact that we have seen both of those tight ends actually be productive in the NFL. I think that they are actually better prospects than Adam Trautman. And the difference is, I mean, really nothing in terms of getting targets on their respective offenses, because we know New England doesn't necessarily have anybody they can throw the ball to. So with Adam Trautman, I understand he's a 6'5", 255-pound specimen. He is a good athlete. He's only 24 years old, and he was highly productive in college. But he went to college at Dayton. I don't necessarily think that you can take that production and automatically assume that it's going to transfer over to the NFL. So because of all of this, I think that Adam Trautman definitely has to be a riser. Of course, I'm going to admit that. I think that his fantasy price has honestly risen a little bit too much, though, where I'm not sure if I can be comfortable. So now let's go over to Los Angeles. Let's switch this up and talk about the Cam Akers injury. And we have already gone out here and we have already looked at Darrell Henderson and where he should be going in fantasy drafts. And I've kind of given in a little bit because we put out that initial reaction. We put out that initial ranking of Darrell Henderson once the Cam Akers injury came out. And I was significantly lower on Darrell Henderson than the majority of people. Since then, yes, we've had to raise him up slightly, but I still don't think we can get as high as the majority of people are on Darrell Henderson. Because we pull this up right now, Darrell Henderson is currently going as a low-end running back 2 in high-stakes redraft leagues. He is going ahead of Travis Etienne. He's going ahead of Javonte Williams. He's going ahead of Kareem Hunt. And I don't necessarily think that we can get there. And a big reason is if you look at Darrell Henderson, I understand that this is a running back that was a very good prospect coming out of Memphis. But since then, he has really never been able to command a full-time role at the NFL level. And I understand, guys, yes, he was playing in an offense that had Cam Akers. And we said at the beginning of last year, when you actually had Darrell Henderson producing at a high level, that Cam Akers was a much better running back to sell Darrell Henderson for whatever you could get because Cam Akers was taking that job. Now, back then, people didn't believe us, but regardless, that's besides the point now. What I want to focus in on is the fact that even when Cam Akers had the rib injury, even when Cam Akers was out of games, Darrell Henderson was still not getting a 3-down role. Darrell Henderson was still splitting that backfield with Malcolm Brown of all running backs. Now, trust me, guys, I understand Malcolm Brown is gone to Miami, which is why before the injury, before Cam Akers went down, I was screaming that Darrell Henderson was a fantastic value in fantasy drafts as a premium handcuff, especially in Dynasty when we know that he's on his rookie contract. So we loved Darrell Henderson before the injury, but all of a sudden, now I think that Darrell Henderson is actually being overvalued in fantasy. And the reason is this team is bringing in competition. I can guarantee you that. I mean, this team has no running back on the roster that was significantly invested into with anything more than a 7th round NFL draft pick or an undrafted free agent. I mean, literally, there's no investment into the running back position at all on this Rams team. We have seen time and time again here that the Rams, Sean McVay, they are not afraid to go out there and trade for a veteran. I think there are so many players that they can actually trade for right now. I mean, a Kareem Hunt, a James Robinson, a Melvin Gordon. All of those players make a lot of sense. And I think that is worst case scenario for Darrell Henderson. I mean, if they trade for James Robinson, his value is just dead. I mean, I think he becomes a committee running back on the wrong side of the committee. And obviously, you're not going to be able to start him in that case, especially if they trade for Kareem Hunt. Now, I will say, yes, there is a chance that Darrell Henderson is a running back 2 in fantasy. And that is if instead of them going out there and trading for one of those guys, they go and they sign a Le'Veon Bell. They go and sign an Adrian Peterson, a Todd Gurley. If they sign a washed up running back that's not going to be able to command the majority of the usage in that backfield, yes, then Darrell Henderson can be a running back 2 on one of the best offenses in football. But for now, when we don't necessarily know which route they're going to be going with, I really want nothing to do with Henderson. I'd rather wait and see because I can guarantee you this team is signing someone. The question is, who are they bringing in? Now, some other things that I have yet to settle in this LA Rams team is I really want to try to feel out what we are going to be doing with Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. I don't think I can move Robert Woods any higher than he previously was ranked in our fantasy rankings for 2021 because with Robert Woods, we actually already had him ranked as the wide receiver 12. So when we have him ranked as the wide receiver 12, when we have Robert Woods as a third-round draft pick, I mean, even with the Cam Akers injury, I'm going to have a very hard time moving him up. Trust me, I love Robert Woods, and it's kind of sad that I think his value is going to rise closer to where we had him, given the fact that this team should skew a little bit more pass happy. Now, the real question is where do we move Cooper Kupp? Now, by the time this video comes out, I will already have that answer. It'll be posted on Patreon in our official 2021 rankings. But previously, we actually had Cooper Kupp ranked as a low-end wide receiver 2. And I think that this has to go up because you look at this overall offense, they lose Cam Akers, they lose Malcolm Brown, they lose Gerald Everett, they lose Josh Reynolds. And while, yes, they bring in Tutu Atwell is like 155 pounds. I am bigger than him. I'm not expecting him to take that many targets. They also add in Matthew Stafford, which should be a significant upgrade in not only the passing efficiency of this offense, but as well as the passing volume that you can expect. So there are so many things that are pointing towards the fact that Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, I think, could potentially each be low-end wide receiver 1s, high-end wide receiver 2s in fantasy this upcoming season. Now, please let me know what y'all are thinking. I think a really sneaky candidate to also see a bump up in value is going to be Tyler Higbee. We were already significantly higher than consensus on Higbee. Hated him last offseason, but since Gerald Everett's gone, since Matthew Stafford is coming in, I think Higbee does become more appealing. And especially with the injury to Cam Akers, because what you're going to be finding is maybe when they get to the red zone more often, I mean, they're going to, instead of be running the ball, maybe they're just dropping back and throwing. And of course, that helps the big body tight end that's going to stick out like a sore thumb in that end zone. Now, thank you, my dudes. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. Of course, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton. And I'll see y'all with the video tomorrow. We've gotten a ton of new members joining the flock. Thank you, Grind for Gold, Devin, Bungified, Brian, Brody, Victor, Chris, Grant, Trevor, and David. Thank you, my dudes.